Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. As a recovering lawyer, a current educator, an author, a spiritual counselor, and a divorce coach who is committed to changing the divorce experience for everyone involved, I'm here to be your guide on the side, emotionally, strategically, and with an eye toward your future. But really, my goal is to help you find your way back to the soul you might have lost. As I often share, my life took many twists and turns before I leaned into becoming a divorce coach. On the way, I earned a master's in Jewish education, and through that process, I spent a week-long immersion at a Jewish residential home for recovery from addiction called Beit Tshuva. In that space, I spent a week learning about the secret sauce to recovery, which is connecting to your soul. Now, we don't go there much in our modern, concrete, so-called rational world, but it's there, it's here. Our animating force is our soul. And as I dug deeper and became certified as a spiritual counselor, I realized that spiritual counseling could be the key to true divorce recovery. And I remember that during my divorce experience, I felt like my soul was crushed. So, what could have been different if I had that soul support? So, when I had that awareness, I didn't know quite how I could pitch that to attorneys. So, I leaned into Jewish education and I went that route until I heard there was a thing called divorce coaching. And that's where I could weave together the soul work, the coaching work, the leadership work, the education work, the divorce knowledge to be a real resource. And that brings me to today's guest, Atara Weisberger. Atara is a board certified health and wellness coach, a certified deep transformational coach, the co author of How to Soul Navigate Your Life Path with Clarity, Inner Peace, and Joy. With warmth and wisdom, she helps women break free from emotional blocks, reconnect with their inner truth, and cultivate lives of joy, resilience, and authenticity. Drawing from her personal journey, from a secular upbringing to a deeply meaningful spiritual life, Atara weaves together ancient Jewish wisdom and modern wellness practices to meet women where they are, empowering them to live fully and soulfully. As the founder of Tribe Holistic Health, she leads a growing community where spiritual growth meets practical self-care. Whether through keynote talks, group workshops, or personal coaching, Atara creates safe, inspiring spaces where women can heal and grow and thrive. Atara, welcome to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And I always love hearing your story. It's
Oh,
just amazing, really.
thank you so much. Well, we all have these powerful stories that we keep underneath,
Right.
right? We don't always show them because we're kind of masked up. We're wearing an armor to help us navigate the world, especially during hard times. And it takes just scratching the surface for us to go deeper. We just
Right.
have to be brave enough to do it. So, so with that, I'm going to ask you to be brave because I know you are, and tell us a bit about your story and your really remarkable journey and how you came to focus on soul work.
Sure. So it's definitely been, I feel like I've lived two lives in a way.
Mm,
Actually, I feel like I've lived more than two lives because so I was raised in a totally not spiritual, not religious home of any kind. And it was just not like God and soul or creator or karma or whatever you want to call it was just not part of the vernacular of the house that I
mm,
grew up in. And at the same time, I was a deeply soulful kid. So there was always kind of a gap between my inner world, which I couldn't describe and I didn't connect to because I didn't really have any impetus to believe in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nothing that was kind of cultivating it. And but I knew that there was, I knew that I was a spiritual kid. So I talk about in the book, we have some personal vignettes in How to Soul. I talk about like I was 5 or 6 years old and I was laying in bed thinking about what it means to die and thinking like, is there just black nothingness forever and ever and ever? And of course I went into like a complete existential panic as a young kid. So I called my mom in and she came in and I said, like, what happens to us when we die? So unfortunately, my parents didn't have a spiritual context at all. And her answer is you live on in the hearts and minds of people who knew you. And I thought to myself, well, who cares? What happens when they die? That doesn't help me at all. And so I kind of locked that existential panic in a little box and put it away for a couple decades, right? But I always gravitated towards nature and I gravitated towards music. And I had an understanding that those were spiritual um, aspects of the universe. Don't ask me how I knew that, but I understood it on some level. And then as life went on, I went to college, I lived overseas, I went to graduate school, kind of traveled all over. And then I took a job in Washington, D.C. And at that point, I had an opportunity to go to Israel, where I had been just for a vacation at some point. And it was nice. I had been all over Europe and lots of places. And it was just another interesting place to me. It didn't like grab me. I thought it was okay, it's good, it's nice, it's fine. Yeah. So after graduate school, a friend of mine convinced me to go on a month-long program. And it was all kinds of different pieces to it. Like there was touring, and there was, meeting politicians, and there was some basic introduction to like Jewish philosophy. But what really grabbed me is the people around me. Like that was really, I saw people around me who seemed to be looking for something that I couldn't name, but I knew that there was something very compelling here. And after a month, I said, it's not time for me to go back yet. Like there's something here and I need to find out about it. So a month turned into 3 months, and 3 months turned into 6 months. And by the end of the year, I had really focused on kind of understanding what is it that makes this place so special? What is it about the people here that I feel so drawn to? What's going on here? And by the end of that year, I had really become much more connected spiritually, much more connected to my Jewish heritage at the time. And continued along that spiritual path and remain observant to this day. But along that way, soon after kind of this 2-year transformation in Israel, I came back, I got married, I had 3 kids very quickly, and within 9 years time we went our separate ways. And that, we'll talk more about that, but that was a very intense part of the journey that I both grew from spiritually, and that I think spirituality helped me through those times, kind of gave me a framework. But there were kind of the two. There was like the personal aspect of my life and the spiritual aspect of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like divorce brought those together.
Wow.
Brought like it became kind of a fusion. So instead of like this is my spiritual being and this is my family life, it was like they come crashing in, and you have to reconcile those two things together. And so at the time when we got divorced, I was a personal trainer and a nutritionist, and I was doing like wellness coaching. But I really dug into after that, and I opened a women's fitness studio for 4 years. When that closed down, I really dug into what aspect of my work it resonates the most with where I am in life and how can I be the most helpful to people. And I had learned and grown so much, and until today through the divorce process, that and we can talk about it a little bit, but in my community there are some particularly unique aspects of divorce. But I kind of looked at what's the most important thing here, and I really saw that like helping women, especially in midlife, and I'm sure you see this too, Lisa, like midlife is really, we're fortunate to live in a time in history where we live till 80, 90 years old. So
Mm-hmm.
45, 50 is literally midlife. And you have an opportunity to utterly recreate yourself if you choose to do that. And the question is, what is it going to be based on? What's that recreation going to come from? And I really decided that like I wanted to help women just connect with the most enduring and authentic part of themselves, which is their soul. And the book How to Soul came out of that process of really wanting to help people in that way. So that was a long answer to a short question.
No, that's a wonderful answer, right? Because there is no straight shot to like, where did we come from? How did we get to this space in our journey?
Right.
Because our journeys don't go in a straight line, much as we like to think that there are tracks. And we talk about life as a track. Like, these are my guideposts. This is what's going to happen for me. Life doesn't always happen that way. In fact, most of the time it doesn't. So, how do we deal with the disappointment when it's not going exactly as planned?
Mm,
And that's where we have the shift and maybe the danger of losing touch with our souls if we felt in touch. But maybe being in touch with our souls isn't a conscious thing. It's just part of who we are. So when we lose that, we don't remember who we are. We don't know what we've lost because we haven't articulated it before.
mm,
So, how does soul help people articulate what actually is their soul for them? And what's the gap that was there that you felt you needed to help readers find?
mm.
I guess that's two questions. So,
Yeah. So let's start with like, how does the book help people connect with their soul? I think one of the interesting things about the book is it highlights what the soul isn't as much as it highlights
Mm,
what the soul is. So we have a lot of internal voices, and it's hard to sort out what's coming from my upbringing, what's coming from my personality, what's coming from my life experience, and what's coming from the most authentic part of me.
mhm,
And I think kind of teasing out, of course, they're all us, right? We don't believe in pieces, parts. We believe in integration, right? So but it is important to know what the voice of the soul sounds like. And we talk a lot about the fact that like it's not a loud booming voice, it's not a negative voice. Like if the internal voice is really negative, right? What I can tell you is that is not the voice of the soul. That is coming from somewhere else. And the question is, okay, so then what is that voice? So the voice of the soul is something that connects you to a greater reality, something that helps you lift up and out of the fray and allows you to really connect kind of in a much more universal way. So it's like standing and zooming the camera back a little bit, right? We get stuck in our own lives. We get stuck in kind of exactly the whatever crucible we're in the moment, right? And I think connecting with soul is a process of, okay, there's a place and a space inside me that is loving, that is accepting, that is peaceful, that doesn't need to control, that doesn't need to hold on tight, that doesn't need to really do anything, right? It just is in the here and in the now and in the present. So the book has exercises and it has meditations, and we have stories, both personal stories from our lives, but also stories of other people who have been in a crisis and how they have connected with their souls and how they've kind of lifted themselves up out of that, out of the crucible enough to like give themselves some breathing room and a little space and time and perspective to really figure out, okay, now I have a little breathing room. What are my possibilities here? And that's the other thing is like the soul is about possibility and it's about growth, but it's not about growth because you took the hammer out and beat yourself. It's growth in an expansive way. It's growth about like, who am I meant to be? Who do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of woman do I want to be? Like, how do I want to show up in this world? What do I want that to look like? And to know that you have that choice and you have that power to utterly recreate yourself should you want to, or even just take tiny little steps. Maybe you don't need a wholesale recreation. Maybe you just feel like there are certain areas of your life that you feel like you know what, I really need to either breathe some space into them, or I can be stronger in those areas, or I can be clearer. And the book, I think, helps both hear what the possibilities, helps you hear your own possibilities,
Mhm.
and also helps like pull the veil away of what isn't soul.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
So I love that. There's so much there that I want to ask you about because, um, you know, we hear a lot. I hear a lot in coaching about the inner critic and how
Hmm.
do we silence the inner critic, that which is that negative voice inside of ourselves that says we're not good enough. And like, what were the voices from outside of us that infiltrated our our hearts to tell us these negative things? And to hear you say it's not our soul is really empowering
Hmm.
because we don't want to think that our soul is beating us up,
Right.
right? That's hurtful. That doesn't support us. And you know, I grew up with this really amazing image of God and soul that I thought my mother gave me, but she claims that she didn't. It was my Hebrew school teacher. But this is the story: is that um, she told us, I believe, that we all have a little piece of God inside of us. That God just drops a little piece of God inside of us for every human who's born, and that's God's self inside of us. And for me as a little girl, that helped me move forward even when someone told me that I was fat or if someone, you know, insulted me for some reason. I knew that I had a little bit of God inside me. So before all the voices became louder, that was a healing piece for me. And so returning back to that story, you know, as I grew and, you know, I mentioned that I had this new background in Jewish education that I actually feel it was part of me from the beginning. I just didn't know how to uncover it. Reading that second chapter of Breshit, which is the book of Genesis, where God breathes the breath of life into the human. Like, so God is kissing our lives into us. And so for me, that's soul. And it's a very textured, personal image that I try to share with my clients, whether they're part of the Jewish tribe or part of another tribe, because we all started with these same stories.
Hmm.
So for me, this idea that like opening the door to the presence of that soul is so powerful. And that's what you know, like you're giving people the tools to do that. So I so appreciate that. Is there anything that you feel had impact on you while you were going through your divorce that you can like articulate for the audience about how your spirituality helped you lift out of some of the darkness?
Such a great question. I love, first of all, your description of like, there is a piece of God inside us. Like, that is what our soul is. There is a piece of the divine. And that is what actually, like enervates our whole system, right? So if you've ever had the experience of watching someone pass like right in front of you, right? If you've ever had that experience, you see the process. The body is there. So what's left them? It's not just that their heart stopped beating. What happened to all that was them, their personality and their history and their experience, and when you see that, you ever, are just kind of in that space with that person as they depart this earthly, creation, is quite profound, because that you just sense that there's something continuing. So into a different space. So that image that you have is really very powerful.
It's
Um,
amazing. We have to
yeah,
take a quick break.
sure.
We're at 19 minutes, and so there's so much to talk about. But we're going to take a 30-second break, and we'll be back
Sounds
with
good.
Atara Weisberger.
Thanks.
And we're back with Atara Weisberger, author of How to Soul. Um, Thank you so much for being here, Atara. This is a deep and thick, meaningful conversation that we don't have these kinds of conversations. And it's so important, especially in this world of divorce.
Yeah.
Um, where do divorce and spirituality meet? Because they seem like opposites.
Mm.
We have loss and we have wholeness. So tell me how your divorce, gave you a different knowledge, maybe became a spiritual catalyst.
Mm.
Um, and how does it support you today?
So I'm going to put the question before the break and this question actually
Okay.
together because I think that was a really important question. Let's start with how spirituality helped me
Right, right.
show up the way I wanted to show up in the context of divorce. And I think that knowing that the most important thing to me was to do the right thing, like in terms of my spiritual beliefs. And that often gave me the strength. So I'll give you a very concrete example, right? So in most divorces, money is an issue, especially
Mhm,
when kids come along. And I can't tell you how many times I took upon myself to figure out how to make more money in lieu of fighting over it, because the fighting, what it did to me and what it did to my kids, I knew was not what God wanted from me.
mhm,
Is what he wanted, what he wanted from me was to not to lay down and accept things that are not reasonable. I don't mean that, but oftentimes when I was given a choice, whether it was, there was like I wanted to vent something to my kids, or there was an issue of like fight or don't fight, it wasn't fighting for the sake of fighting. I learned to fight for the things that were critical and really, really important. But because I had a spiritual context, my behavior also meant something, because I'm not going to be judged for how much money I made or didn't make, right? I'm going to be judged by the kind of person that I showed up as, whether it's, honest or compassionate or thinking about the best thing for my kids or whatever. Excuse me. Whatever that was, is that became a real framework for me of like, my job spiritually is to show up as a divine person, as a
mm,
divine being. What does that look like? What do I think God expects of me in any given situation? Were there things I fought for? Of course there were things I fought for, but I didn't fight for the sake of fighting. And I think my kids are who they are today. Same thing with speaking badly, for example, about, their father or
yeah,
whatever, is just sort of like I would say to myself, like, that is putting negative energy, that is putting hurt out into the world, that is putting an unnecessary burden on my children. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be that person. And so it was very concrete to always kind of draw it back to how do I want to show up, and
mhm,
based on kind of a spiritual basis. The flip side of that, which is, how did I grow spiritually? I think the number one thing for me, and I'm still working on this, okay, this is not a one and done. This is a lifelong work for me, is that in the community that I live in, it's a close-knit community, and there are certain kind of standards and expectations that one is expected to meet to fully fit in. Divorce is not on that list. So for me, it was always so important what people thought of me, right? And having what we call in Hebrew a shem tov, having a good name, was
mhm,
such a driving force for me for the vast majority of my life. And I had to make a decision. Do I stay where I am and suffer in my home and keep external appearances? Or do I follow my heart and deal with the fact that people are going to think negatively about me? People are going to judge me. And they do, and they will, and they'll judge my kids for that. And, my kids when they got old enough, we had conversations about how do they feel. And listen, divorce is getting much more common, whether it's in my community or it's in any other community. And so common, in fact, that I heard something on the radio, Lisa, I want to share. I don't want to forget to share it if you can remind me. But I almost fell out of the car when I heard this commercial. It was like, we're on a whole other level with divorce now.
Wow.
But that was like a real struggle for me, is to keep focusing. Like I had to really grow towards, okay, it's really like my focus has to be, what does God think of my behavior, or
Right,
what,
right,
instead of what do people think of my
right.
behavior.
It's so interesting, and like there again, there's so much that I want to go deeper in,
Hmm.
but when you first talked about your journey toward a greater spiritual life, you talked about the people around you who influenced you and who you were inspired by to help you find your soul. And so it was the community.
Mm,
And so when that community that helped you find your spirituality now judges you, in some ways rejects you, but that was the community that was your link to your spirituality, that's there's a disconnect there. So,
wow.
yeah, how do we grapple with that?
So first of all, I have never put that together. That was a total wow.
Mm.
What a beautiful and totally astute observation. So how do I put that together? Since becoming observant, I always made a distinction between the religion and the people who practice it. I'm crystal clear that human beings are human beings, which means that we all have struggles. Um, we're all trying to fit in. We're all trying to make our way forward, right? So it's not that I'm judging the people who judge me. I sort of see them as they're humans, and their reasons are for them to grapple with about why they're judging me, right?
Mhm,
And by the same token, like I don't really see them as the same people who were involved with, who really cared deeply about everyone who came through that space in Israel. And really, like there was a real deep soul focus at that time. Now, I mean, in the group of people that I met, there was a very serious soul focus and a real drive to grow as a human being. And I'm not saying that the people who judge me aren't, but I almost see them as like, yes, it's from the same community, but they're almost like different creations in certain ways
mm,
in my mind. And I see it again. This is the spiritual take, right? I see it as a catalyst for my own growth. I don't focus on them and what they're doing or not
mhm,
doing. Does it hurt me? It does hurt me. It hurts me all the time, and things kind of come back to me and I hear them, and it doesn't matter what I've done in the community or haven't done in the community. And that's a real struggle. It really is. But I just say to myself, like, okay, how can I turn this into an opportunity to become more of the person that God
mhm.
wants me to be? And that's the space I hang in.
Yeah, and that's the soul work,
Right.
and it's work. It's not like, "Oh, I discovered my soul, I'm done."
No,
Like, this is a continuing journey, right?
right.
It's the journey, not the destination. So, how to soul, I'm imagining you're giving guidelines on how to access your soul,
Correct.
but you're not saying, "Do this or else you'll never attract your soul," or, "Until you do this, you won't attract your soul," or, "If you don't attract your soul, you must be doing something wrong." Like, this
Mm-mm.
book is not about judgment. It
No.
I'm it's about access, and it's
Yes.
about also making a choice to go toward your soul instead of
Right.
running away from it.
The soul is, by definition, it's accept, like, what is God, right? God is love, God is giving, God is accepting, God is like, or whatever you want to call it, universe, creator. This has nothing to do with religion. This has to do with the absolute inalienable kind of spiritual peace that you have inside you. It's there no matter what you do. It's there no matter what happens in your life. It's always accessible. There's no such thing as turning it away. Until you take your last breath, you can connect with it. It's meant to be the steady, sure source of wisdom. How your soul expresses itself is completely different person to person. One
Yeah.
person might connect through music, one person connects through nature, one person connects through movement, somebody else connects through prayer, somebody else connects through being with, being with close friends. I mean, there's so many ways, as many people as there are ways that your soul can express itself. And it's the book is there's nothing about judgment. It's just the
Mhm.
opposite. We speak very clearly that the voice of judgment is not the voice of the soul.
Right.
And
Right.
that's an important thing to remember for sure.
So, and that brings me to a quote from Harriet Rosetto, who was the founder of Beit Shuva, this space for
Mm,
residential space for recovery in LA. And Harriet gives talks on the difference between role versus soul. Like we all have so many different roles, and we think that
right,
our roles are what define us and make us who we are, but they are connected to one piece of you. They're all connected to your soul, which means being a mom doesn't define you. Being a lawyer doesn't define you.
right,
Being a divorced person doesn't define you. It's an aspect of you. It's a facet of the many pieces that make you who you are, but it's all different related to the soul that you have within you.
right. And I think part of the spiritual work too is that, you know, sometimes from the outside, people kind of whitewash us as our roles. They
Mhm.
have their expectations of us, whether it's as a mother or it's as an employee or it's as a community member or it's right. And when we start to shift those roles externally as we shift inside, and that may shift some of our external roles, there can be some kickback to that.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
can push back on our transformation and what we're doing. And it's important to continue to check back in with yourself of, is this a role that I'm ready to let go of? Is this a role that I kind of want to make some changes to? But to just know and expect that there's often pushback, because while we know how diverse and complex we are inside, often outside looking in, and we do this to other people too, right? We make a
Mhm.
snap judgment. We look at them and we decide who they are, even though we don't really know them, etc. And we have to, part of the spiritual process is really being aware of that we are very complex, and that those roles may shift and people may not like that so much, and to kind of think in advance, what do I want the narrative to look like when people push back? What do I want to be able to express when people say that? I hear that this is uncomfortable for you, this is a change for you, I understand, but this is really important to me in my journey, and I would love for you to walk alongside me.
Mm.
Whatever the language is that seems to work and seems to feel right, but just know that when we go from role to soul, that sometimes there's going to be resistance from the
Yeah.
outside.
And that's the difference of divorce. You're really shifting your role because your status, your actual physical status is
Yeah.
changing
Yep.
from being a married person to being an unmarried person. And that's a different um definition. So everybody reframes who you are from the
Correct.
outside. You even do it to yourself because you're influenced, but the inside of you, that soul piece is the same. That doesn't shift just
Correct.
because your status shifts. And that's a big part of divorce because it's disconnect. And how do I process that? And I want to believe that, but I don't know how I can. I don't have that support. So, you know, your book is such a wonderful tool for people who are going through these big transitions and transformations.
It can be very helpful just to quiet the noise.
Hmm.
We have meditations and exercises that are very good at like calming down the all those other voices, right? And to really hear kind of the quietness
Hmm.
that's always there, and
It's
that
always
really can be an oasis. And it's true of the world also, like on a global level. Everything around us is changing, and it's changing so quickly, and sometimes it just feels like the ground beneath us is not stable anymore, and where do we go with that? And I think that knowing that there is somewhere to retreat to within yourself that's always going to be there. I think about like the hostages in Gaza, right? is like they had nothing, right? They literally had, like, sometimes they didn't have food or drink or anything. And what was it that nobody could take away from them, right? A lot of them who were totally not religious or anti-religious or anti kind of spirituality
Mhm.
before then, what was the one thing that they wanted to do when they were there is just have conversations with God. Like,
Yeah.
that's what kept so many of them going, because when you strip away all the roles and you strip away all the distractions, no atheist in a foxhole, right? What happens is you begin to recognize what is absolutely the simplest form of existence, which is that connection to your inner essence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. And so often in divorce, people don't even remember what that inner essence is. And that's what I try to help people with, right? I feel like I need to lean more into that in my work because it's really what got me here in the first place.
Mm.
And just yesterday, I was having a consult with a new client who is a religious Christian person. And she was talking about several issues related to divorce and how, her ex-husband is fighting because, or her soon to be, because it's against God. And I shared with her that, the Bible discusses divorce.
Mhm.
And the fact that it actually is discussed means it was an issue 3,000 years ago.
Right,
So the fact that it discusses it means that this is a real part of life.
right.
So we were able to have that conversation, and I was able to tune into her soul, her conflict in that soul, because I have these tools and because I've learned my soul work is becoming fluent in the language
Mm.
and a way to communicate. And so, when I hear you and your fluency, it like it powers me up. It
Mm.
powers me up and we are like way past time. So I just want to keep talking because there's so much here.
Yeah.
And so let me like sort of cut to the chase. If you had like a line for someone who's like in the middle of heartbreak or a big change, what's like one soul-centered practice they can try to today to begin their healing journey?
Mm. So I would say to go to a place where you both feel where you feel safe and where you feel peaceful. And that represents kind of the one of the favorite parts of yourself, so to speak. And to really just do a very simple breathing. And it's very interesting because breath and soul in Hebrew are the same word. It comes from the same root, right? Nishama.
Mhm.
And it comes from the same root. So breath and soul are very connected. So, are they actually the same thing in a lot of ways? So to go to a place where you feel centered, grounded, safe, peaceful, and literally just do a simple exercise of listening to the breath and getting in touch with it and calming the nervous system a little bit and just getting quiet and getting centered. It's so simple, and it can be your favorite room in the house. It can be sitting under a tree at a park. It can be wherever it is that you feel good and safe. And then just to do that simple connect with the breath exercise. And that's often very grounding and centering.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. And the breath, it brings us back to the soul,
Yes.
right? You said like we know, I mean, because we understand how Hebrew works, we know it comes from the same root.
Right.
And but the idea that of that image of God breathing the breath of life into the human, for me, always brings it back to it's not just that like, oh, it's another one of these breathing techniques, or I have so much trouble with the breath work in yoga. It's more like breath is life.
Yes.
And we all have that and we can be grateful for it.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you
Exactly.
so much, Atara. Tell us
Yes.
how can my people find you?
So you can find me. My email is Coach Atara, CoachAtara @gmail.com, or you can find me on my website at tribeholistichealth.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. This was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I hope you come back because we only
Would love to.
scratched the surface.
Love
For
to.
my audience, you can find me, Lisa, at lzlcoaching.com and www.lzlcoaching.com. Until next time, I'm Lisa Lisser, and this is Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter.